Yeah, moving on. We did have a couple of same country ties in the tournament this week, the Champions League. Bayern saw off Leverkusen last night, and we will get to that in a moment or two, because on Tuesday night we had, and this we talked about last week, the Madrid Champions League derby, and that was a match, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and it was really satisfying without really actually exploding. It just fizzled a little bit, I think. I mean, if ever there were two heavyweights sizing each other up, this were they. And I think it goes to show that whereas it's similar, I guess, thematically in the way that PSG are moving away from the caricature that we have of them, I think you can say that Real Madrid and Atlético Madrid are doing the same as well. They're two teams that are in the Champions League every year. We think we know them really well. But I think a lot of people still look at Real Madrid as this collection of Galacticos. And that is simply not how they play. And it's simply not how they've been successful in the Champions League for so long. Real Madrid and Atlético have got way more in common than they would like to admit. Now, Diego Simeone would admit it because he's a man who's very, very comfortable with his sense of self. But I think that is something that a lot of people find hard to get their heads around. But I think you look at this, and this is quite a typical Champions League performance from both of these teams, actually. The fact that Real Madrid score early and then they kind of sit off. Atletico dominate the game. They control the game for most of the first hour without pressing, without harassing, without harrying them, partly because there's no need to and partly because that's not them. And then when Real Madrid manage to get themselves in front as well, they control the game and keep Atletico at arm's length very, very well. And so we'll get into the needle of it and how these teams really get on each other's wick. When you see two siblings arguing, it's mainly because they're way more similar to each other than they would like to admit. And I think this is the case here. They really get under each other's skin. And we heard David saying last week, David Cartledge, about how this is maybe not such a pinnacle of football as the best Real Madrid-Barcelona games, but the Madrid derby is much more intriguing and entertaining than El Clasico at the moment. And I think this game really endorsed that.
Yeah, well, we're only at half-time, Lars. I know you've got comments about Bayern and Leverkusen as well, but we'll come to that in a moment. At half-time, there's still a lot to play for in this tie, the Madrid derby Champions League tie.
Yeah, it was an interesting game, this. It just wasn't thrilling and exciting in the way that PSG Liverpool was. And on a very personal note, I had spent the day playing golf in cold and windy weather, so I'd gotten a lot of fresh air on my face. And staying awake throughout this, I must confess, it was a battle. But I can on a sort of intellectual level, I can appreciate the sort of the quality and the organization that went into it. And it is interesting. Real Madrid, in particular, are kind of an outlier among the sort of so-called super clubs in European football, among the very top clubs in Europe. I don't think there's anyone that, to the extent that Real Madrid does, do not look to dominate games in the same way by pressing high, by strangling the opponent. Like, Real Madrid are more than happy to sit off. Now, that makes sense for them because, again, they've taken over the Mbappe challenge, which is that you have maybe the most talented player of his generation, possibly like the most deadly goal scorer, I would say, in terms of someone who can change the game on his own. But he doesn't do a ton off the ball. And then you have Vinicius Jr., who's also like not exactly Rino Gattuso off the ball. And you have to try to find a way of making that work. And so you're certainly not playing with a high press and looking to have 70% possession and like a Pep Guardiola team would, or like a Hansi Flick team would down in Barcelona. You know, you are going to play in a very different way. And I guess that's when you come up against Atletico Madrid, who are also kind of happy sitting off. You get a game that looks different than to a lot of top ties in the sharp end of the Champions League. And I actually think Atleti had more possession in the first half, which is a strange state of affairs when you go to the Bernabeu. but that is the kind of football you get between these two teams. And it is, and I kind of, Atleti, I feel like they did almost everything that you want to do in the away leg first when you go to Real Madrid. You kept Mbappe pretty quiet. You didn't let them have huge counter-attacking chances against you so that those fast players can really run at you. They were very, very good at stopping that from happening. And the outcome was a game that wasn't super exciting to watch, but they go back to the Wanda Metropolitano with just one goal down, and they probably would have taken that before kickoff, I think, Atleti.
I think because the two league games have been draws, like Simeone was visibly disappointed that they lost. But you're right, it's far from unsalvageable, particularly with the atmosphere at the Metropolitano, particularly because it will be a gritty and attritional game. But of course, Real Madrid are as ready for that as Atlético, which is something that is not widely acknowledged. Now, I guess touching on Mbappe, I think it's really worth touching on his performance because he's been brilliant in recent months. Of course, his nadir so far with Real Madrid was that game away at Liverpool in which he played really poorly and he looked in crisis, for want of a better word. And we've talked on the show about how well Ancelotti has managed that since. This was the first time in months he's been really panned for a performance in the media in Madrid, and people really got at him and were disappointed with how little he was involved in this game. I'm tempted to say this is simply not his sort of game. Now, that doesn't mean he can't have the decisive contribution. He couldn't find a moment and score a goal that would change the tie or seal the tie in the second leg. But I think the way, as Lars was saying, the way that Real Madrid want to play, certainly in a game like this, just does not suit him at all. And you look at the way that they really use the width of the pitch. Now, sometimes we see that interchange, don't we, between Mbappe and Vini Jr. We didn't see it here because clearly Atletico want to make it compact. They want to gum it all up in the middle. And the counteraction to that is Ancelotti saying to Rodrigo and Vini, stay wide for the most part. And with no Bellingham as well, because Bellingham's suspended, what does that do to Mbappe? It makes him completely isolated. That's what it does for him. So obviously everyone has to take responsibility for their own performances, but this was not a game that was set for Mbappe to go and win. On the other hand, Brahim Diaz, we have to have a word for him because not only does he score the winning goal, not only does he score a magnificent winning goal, Lars, but if we go back to the last season when they went into a game without Jude Bellingham and Brahim played instead, a game away at Leipzig at this stage in the Champions League where they're really under pressure. Certainly in the first half, they're in trouble. Leipzig had a good goal incorrectly ruled out. And who goes and wins the game with a bit of brilliant individual skill when it's not looking promising is Brahim. Yeah,
and I guess it's one of the sort of luxuries that you have as Real Madrid is because you are Real Madrid. You are a unique, iconic club. You can have guys like Brahim Diaz, who is seemingly happy to not start every week, to be a squad player. I think he's someone who is talented enough to be a regular and be an important player for most teams on the planet. Like the list of teams where Brahim wouldn't be a starter is not a long one. Agreed. I think it's a very, very short one. And the list of teams where he would accept playing second fiddle is probably even shorter. I suspect there's only one name on that list. But that is an advantage that you have of being Real Madrid. And it was a tremendous goal. And it was a goal that you got not out of the typical, like the sort of counter into massive space with the Vinicius or Mbappe or Bellingham running into like what you associate with a Real Madrid goal now. It was him really clever footwork and finding something out of nothing. It's so valuable to have that in your squad. Like that is huge, of course.
It does seem as if we're all set up for a really fascinating second leg of this tie.
Yeah, get more sleep before the second leg, Lars.
Well, stop playing golf because I know you're out on the golf course.
It's a terrible suggestion.
You're out on the golf course for that one, but you weren't out on the golf course when Bayern Munich took on Bayern Leverkusen, were you?
I did play in the afternoon actually before that game as well, but no, it was easier to stay awake. There was more stuff going on. It was hard to keep track of both the PSG Liverpool game, which was absolutely thrilling, and try to keep an eye on Bayern as well. I mean, there's a lot going on Wednesday night. I thought this was almost like a more significant result than I feel it's been given credit for. I mean, we're the morning after, so there hasn't been so much time for the credit to be given out. I guess this doing podcasts like this is part of the gestation period for these. But just scrolling social media, and it kind of feels like, oh yeah, Bayern Munich have battered a German team. That seems, I mean, that seems to be a thing that usually happens. But and regular listeners to OTC will know this perhaps, but you know, it wasn't obvious that this game was going to go that way. I mean, when they met just a couple of weeks ago, Leverkusen were so much better than Bayern, and Bayern were really holding on to get out of there with a draw. And the Champions League is really, really important for Bayern Munich this year, with the final being in Munich. It's a huge deal for them. It matters a lot for them to try to get there. And as much as they are cruising domestically, there have been a few really iffy games in the Champions League that's made it look like this team has a lot of attacking talent, but it's not a team that you feel super confident is going to go all the way in this tournament, because they have some real defensive weaknesses. So then coming up against Leverkusen with Xabi Alonso, who's undefeated in 6 against Bayern since he took over for Leverkusen, it feels to me like a tie that could have gone super wrong in a potentially traumatic way for Bayern Munich as a club. But instead, they were really dominant, 1-3-0. Harry Kane scores twice. Everything is fine. But yeah, it was not a given that everything would be fine in this game, if I phrase that in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the interesting thing is, when you look at the 3 times they played each other previously this season, 2 in Munich in the Bundesliga and the DFB Pokal, and once in Leverkusen, as you were describing, Lars. In all 3 of those games, the home team really dominates, but you never get the result to go with that. So Leverkusen don't get it over the line a month and a bit ago against Bayern, and in the home games, Leverkusen take up this quite passive position in the league game, and it takes Pavlovic to score a cracker from absolutely miles out to get Bayern a draw. And then, because they go down to 10 men in the cup game, because Manuel Neuer gets sent off, that compromises them. Nathan Tella scores the winner for Leverkusen, but really Bayern should have had something out of that. This is the first time they've played each other where the result goes with the performance. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the fact that Harry Kane scores early on. I think that's really important. It's a great goal, by the way, the opening goal. It's absolutely perfect centre-forward play. But it feels to me that Leverkusen panicked a little bit after that. And I think you could see that. There was a shot at the end after they'd been substituted you may have seen it, of Florian Wirtz and Jeremy Frimpong on the touchline. They're both shouting and presumably swearing and covering their faces in I can't believe we've let this chance slip. And what we associate Leverkusen with more than anything else is composure. No matter what the situation, they all know. You speak to the players and they go, well, we never feel panicked because we just follow the boss's plan and it's fine. But this time, I think the boss's plan let them down. Now, I think the obvious bit is the fact that he picks Kovac in goal instead of Radetsky. Now, it's their policy to pick the second choice goalkeeper, who they hope will eventually become the first choice goalkeeper for the cup games. There's a big question mark, especially after an error like this, picking him for an absolutely massive, almost beyond Champions League game, because you're playing your biggest domestic rivals in it. I think the other part is, as Lars was saying, the bit that really stopped them winning that game in Leverkusen last month, where they totally dominated and they were brilliant, and obviously we went over there for OTC, is the fact that they went into that game without a recognised striker, that they go without Patrick Schick and they go without Victor Boniface. Now, not only because they didn't get that over the line last time, I think they were leaving themselves very vulnerable. It's clearly Alonso's idea that when you play Bayern, you want mobile, non-fixed point strikers. but that committed them to pressing a little higher. And I think that's mad in an away leg against Bayern in a knockout competition, to be perfectly honest. And I think that's what...
Why? Why is it mad against?
It leaves them way open, particularly away from home. And particularly when they're in a situation where really they probably want to sit deep and get themselves a result that's going to give them a chance in the second leg. Because even if they'd have lost this like 1-0 or 2-1, they're still in it. I don't think they're in this tie at all now.